Hello water signs, I hope you're well. Welcome to your June 2021 eclipse horoscopes. So I'm doing things a little bit differently. I'm changing things up this eclipse season. I've divided my eclipse forecast into 4 videos for each of the 4 elements. So this horoscope is going to start with a general section that looks at how this eclipse works in terms of the astrology and which bits of it impact water signs most. And then I'm going to dive into each of the 3 signs individually, where I'm going to look at exactly where this is going to impact your chart, and also get into some more details. So you can join me for the general forecast, and then have a look at the timestamps below, where you can go directly to your individual forecast, or if you're impatient, then just jump to the the individual forecast, and you can check those out. Also, if you haven't seen it, I have done a more general video on YouTube, which looks at the mundane astrology of this eclipse in terms of how it might affect global affairs, trends in the external world, that kind of thing. So if that's something that interests you, then do check that out too. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this, and let's get started. So first things first, let's put this eclipse into context. So the family that this eclipse belongs to, the Saros series that it forms part of, is known as 5 North. This is the name that Bernadette Brady gave to it. And this particular Saros series is associated with sudden flashes of intuitive insight. So, like gut, kind of gut feelings, hunches, visions, and prophetic dreams. So it's possible, given that you water signs are so intuitive, that you are really going to find yourself being very in tune with your intuition at this time. Either that, or you may feel a strong creative urge coming on. But I think this is going to be really, really key to really tap into your internal kind of GPS and listen to the messages that are coming through to you, through creative mediums, dreams, channel through when you're kind of journaling, or whatever it is that you do to get into that mindset, meditate. Because I think it's going to really help you to guide you through what could otherwise be a bit of a surreal and slightly overwhelming time, because it's going to be quite eventful and busy. Now, previous instances of this series were 2003. That was the last time we had this eclipse. And so you might want to think back to that time, if you were around then, of course, to see whether there are kind of any connections with whatever unfolds now. There might be some thematic connections, or you may be revisiting certain things from that time. And then, of course, have a look at the other time periods that I've listed, which are the last time that we've had these eclipses in, during the 20th century, to see if there are any parallels with historic events that you can kind of identify with, just to sort of help you get some context. So in terms of the Sabian symbol, the June eclipse happens in the 20th degree of Gemini, and the Sabian symbol for this is a cafeteria with an abundance of choices. So an interesting symbol, I think, and maybe ones that particularly Cancerians will identify with. There's something in here about communing with other people, being in a cafeteria, so kind of a public environment, but also a place where they're serving food, and then having to kind of make choices about what we ingest. And I think this is really a really good metaphor for the overall theme of this eclipse, which is to be able to make good choices, healthy choices, choices that are going to nourish us rather than deprive us, choices that are going to not necessarily be about instant gratification, but are going to kind of set us up for the long term. And I think the key here is to really tune into your to your intuition and to your inner internal guidance system, and let that help you to make choices that are right for you. Number one, they may not be right for other people, but they are right for you. And also not to feel that you have to take everything that's offered to you. That it's more a question of kind of choosing quality over quantity, and taking your time in making those decisions to make sure that they really resonate with where you kind of want to be in the future. Because there's a lot about this eclipse that's asking us to consider where we see ourselves going, and how we want to start moving in that direction. And some of the choices that we make now, I think, are going to be quite key. So, taking your time, not feeling you have to rush, I think is going to be important, and also help us to digest whatever it is that we do choose to ingest. You know, we've got 6 months in which to make these decisions and to, you know, take action. We don't have to sort of do things immediately out of kind of knee-jerk, you know, reaction. So just a couple of, just some food for thought, as it were, to maintain the metaphor. But, you know, by all means, pause the video, have a look at the keywords and the caution which come from Linda Hill's Sabian Oracle to see if anything else kind of jumps out at you. So key themes for water signs. So I suppose, you know, first thing to really say is that this eclipse happens in Gemini, and of course the element that rules Gemini is air. So for you water signs, you might find this a little bit surreal. You might feel a little bit detached or removed because things seem to almost be happening so quickly and perhaps without any warning or without any context, that it might be hard to process everything that's going on from an emotional perspective. So you might find yourself kind of very in your head, which, you know, for water signs can be a little bit anxiety kind of provoking, because that's not always the place that you make decisions based from. Or you could find things just moving at a pace that feels superficial, that you can't really get a sense of the emotional charge behind it or the implications of it. And I think the key thing is to remember that this is mutable air energy. So here is where it's going to overlap very nicely with your water element. You know, mutable energy is very fluid, it's very plastic, so it's very adaptable. It flows around problems, it morphs naturally from one state to another, you know, in response to changes to its surroundings. So I think that that's a good attitude to have now, you know, not to sort of feel too knocked off balance, and to really allow yourself to time to process things on an emotional level, and not feel that you have to necessarily roll with the punches in the sense of getting stuck in and making decisions, you know, almost taking a slightly more detached perspective, you know, much like when you meditate, so that you kind of come back to your center and you really kind of check in with yourself, so that you're not knocked about by the volatility of external events, because there is a lot happening, and we'll see that when we get to the astrology. So I think it's going to be important to try and maintain your emotional center so that you can deal with everything that gets thrown at you. So in terms of planets, the key planets for water signs in this particular event are Jupiter and Neptune, which will both be in Pisces. So this is very idealistic, ethereal, compassionate energy. It's really about you know, tuning into what's best about humanity, what we wish for society, you know, the ideal. But, you know, also conversely, Neptune certainly is going to be squared by the eclipse planet. So there's also a need to maintain boundaries, so not kind of oversharing or kind of overreacting. You know, if, as I said, this could be quite overwhelming energy, so trying to sort of not overreact emotionally, to try and stay centered and wait, you know, not to jump to conclusions that might you know, be upsetting. Let the dust settle, and also allow time to make decisions, as I say, from more of a kind of centered place emotionally, so that your thinking isn't too clouded, because that is certainly a possibility given that Mercury is retrograde and square to Neptune. And then key aspects to bear in mind, obviously we will go into how these are likely to work for each sign individually. Venus in Cancer, which will be square to Chiron, so this could be a time when we feel a little bit triggered, but equally it could be a time when we are given opportunities to heal family wounds or issues around food, self-care, nourishment, and what feels healthy. You know, our values may be questioned now, and see this as a good opportunity to clarify what is important to you and what you feel is healthy and what isn't, particularly when it comes to relationships. And then the other key aspect is the Mars-Pluto opposition, which will perfect on the 5th of June, but which will still be in orb when we get to this eclipse on the 10th. So this is a cardinal opposition, and includes Mars in Cancer, which is of course cardinal water energy. So this could feel quite tense. It could, you know, really kind of bring up a lot of buried emotions, and possibly ructions or power struggles, particularly with family members or around things like, you know, food, home, feelings of security, that kind of thing. You may feel threatened on some level. So I think the key is to take note of the balancing aspects, which we will get into, both to Mars and to Pluto, because I think there we'll find the kind of silver linings that will help us to mitigate any difficulties that arise as a result of this opposition. But I think the key thing is to remember that oppositions are all about trying to find balance. So that's the sort of the takeaway, is to try and stay centered, you know, move to the middle of that opposition, to try and find the position of compromise, the halfway point between the two opposing sides, so that you can, you know, try and resolve the issue. And then finally Mercury, which is retrograde in Gemini, will be making a square to Neptune in Pisces. So again, as I was saying earlier, this can lead to confusion, sometimes deception, trickery, dishonesty, or just misunderstandings, you know, because Mercury is the planet of communication and of thinking, and Neptune can sometimes create clouded thinking, or the inability to see things clearly, or mean that emotional boundaries aren't always respected. So, you know, just some of the key themes to be aware of, you know, as we move into eclipse season more fully. But now I'm going to get into each of the signs individually and look at more details. So if you want to just have a look at the timestamps below to move directly to the correct forecast for your rising sign, then by all means do so.